Hello everyone, I'm here with one of the goats of Magic, Froehlich. Just for a little bit of introduction, most people who play Magic probably know who Eric is, but maybe someone doesn't. He has 5 Pro Tour top 8s, 2 GP wins with 19 top 8s if the information on MTG Wiki is correct, and he's also 2 times. I don't really know poker, but it's like a World Series of Poker bracelet champion or something like that. Is that accurate?
Something like that.
Okay, cool. And you also were inducted into the Hall of Fame. You actually even proposed to your wife during the Hall of Fame ceremony. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit later. And also when I ask you what you like do for hobbies and stuff, you mentioned that you're like a professional bettor on sports. Maybe we can get into that later as well. How it's going, man?
It's going good. I mean, I've been stuck in my house for what feels like 10 years, and I guess it's almost a year now. This pandemic has been rough here. Our country's not handled it well, so that's frustrating, but luckily I am a homebody and I enjoy being in my house, and my wife and I just closed on a new house and moved in about a month and a half ago now, so yeah, we're still getting settled and figuring stuff out here, and we love it. It's a great house, and yeah.
Yeah, I actually saw it on Twitter that you bought a new house. Was that not an issue during the pandemic to do that?
Oh, it was definitely an issue. It was
a
very big pain in the ass. We did most of our searching, a lot of searching you'd normally do more in person. We had to do a lot more online and then kind of figure out which houses you like the best, and then you'd have to show up at the houses, but there couldn't be anyone else there, so it'd just be us and our real estate agent, and we'd have to, wear masks, and for at certain points with certain houses, you couldn't like touch the doors and do various other things because they're worried about germs at various other times. It's kind of the situation's improved, but also it's always, no one really has any real answers about how the pandemic's going to affect, all sorts of situations. So it was mostly a cautious situation for a lot of this stuff. So yeah, it was a pain, but we managed to get through it.
Why did you decide to go through all of this pain, during the pandemic and didn't wait? Like you just really wanted the house and you were afraid that you would not be able to get it afterwards, or what happened?
No, there's actually a lot of reasons. I mean, first off, so my situation is very weird in that I owned a house in Las Vegas where I had it for about 10 years. I lived in Las Vegas for 10 years. I'd had the house for like 7.
Okay.
And my wife got offered a job for basically a temporary contracting position for Wizards of the Coast. That was October of 2019. So she was their esports community manager. And the thing is, that's a 1-year contract. And the way Wizards works is that we don't know when she signs if she's going to be full-time at the end. And they have the option at the end of the year to just be like, all right, thank you. And they don't tell you before that, so you have to wait the full year. And so that meant we couldn't sell our house in Vegas. It was very much a last-minute thing, so we had to find a house to rent up here in the Seattle area, which, for those who don't know, Seattle's one of the most expensive places in the world.
Wow.
So we were spending a lot of money to rent the house. We had another house in Vegas that was just left there because we didn't have enough time to kind of stage it to rent that out. And then once we started to try to get ready to be able to rent that out short term, the pandemic hit, so that became really hard to do too. So we're paying for 2 houses. We had a 1-year lease when she got extended full time. So at that point, we're paying extra money to rent that house. Because of the pandemic and because of Trump, kind of screwing up everything possible, mortgage rates, so being able to borrow money from the bank to buy a house, were at astronomical all-time lows. So to borrow money at this point in time for a loan for a house is like a valuable thing. So you're basically getting money, like you actively want to do it in a lot of ways. There's a lot of benefits to it. And for a lot of people who already had houses, they're basically refinancing, which means selling back their loan, getting a new loan at a much better rate, even though you have to pay thousands of dollars in fees to do that. Wow. That's how good it was. Nice. And so it made a lot of sense to go quickly for that perspective, and it made a lot of sense to not have multiple houses at once. We're renting and owning. So I wanted to sell my house in Vegas at that point because we're going to live up here because now she's got the job full time. And so it just is, it was a very expensive thing. And we were losing a lot of money every month that we were up here by renting and owning at the same time, so it just, there was a lot of reasons to try to actually get into a house.
I see. I wanted to ask about that later, but since you mentioned the work that your wife do for Wizards, I'm gonna ask about it now. You actually announced that you're quitting MPL because of that. Is that just like a rule that you cannot be married to someone who works for Wizards, or how does that work?
That's a really good question because I don't think anyone really has the answer of exactly how that works. Because the rule as written says basically that you can't be related to anyone who's full-time employee. So it worked totally fine when she was a contract employee. They let me continue. But once she was full-time, even though her job is the exact same, there's no change. It doesn't really make sense as to why that would be the case. It's mostly it's not I don't believe it is a law, like that this is something they're required to do. But the problem is, if I win a tournament, there will be some number of people who will claim that I had an unfair advantage. Did I have an unfair advantage by doing so? No, of course not. Like, I wouldn't. And it would require my wife to give me information that breaks her contract, which I wouldn't want her to do anyway. And I think that anyone who's played Magic on a professional level knows that the amount of gain that you can have by doing those type of things is also extremely small. Like, if you look at the tournaments that are going on nowadays, the last few major events, the Mythic Championships, the Players Tours, whatever, they were months after sets came out. Like, the metagame was defined. So even if you had that information early, it would have been actual worthless. And so, it doesn't really change much. But, I don't know. Like, the rule states that, you can't have siblings who work there, and you can't have various other, people, like your dad can't work there, and then you play professionally. But obviously they have exceptions for some players, so I don't have a reason as to why that is, but, I roll with the punches, and so they tell me I can't play, so I can't play.
Was that a difficult thing for you to do, or you just, didn't really care anymore, or was that a big deal for you?
It's definitely a big deal. I mean, Magic is very much tied to my identity. I've been playing Magic for getting close to 27 years. Professional Magic definitely means a lot to me. Now, that's not to say that there aren't pros to it as well. Was it a difficult decision? Yes and no. I mean, no, because this is the job that my wife really wanted. And of course, I'm willing to give up playing professional Magic to make my wife, have the job that she really wants. It's not that big a deal, but it does mean a lot. It's not like it didn't hurt. It didn't not hurt to do it. It was
I understand.
a painful thing, but it also wasn't a tough decision. So it's tough because Magic is I've considered leaving professional Magic every year going into each year. I was pretty sure I was going to leave for the last several years. And the first time that happened, I started, that's when they brought in this team series thing. And that was actually the first time I tested with you and joined. We created a.
Yeah, I remember that even during that time you said that you kind of want to quit. That probably never changed.
So I never want to quit Magic, but there's a lot of things about professional Magic and traveling and the grind and the stress, and there's a lot of downsides to it too. There's a lot of upsides. It's certainly a fun thing at times, but it also is, not always the easiest. And so there were a lot of times in my life where it felt like it made more sense to focus on other things versus Magic. But creating that team series and getting to play with, what I think was the best team and a lot of my closest friends and working together with a great group, that's the kind of thing in Magic that I cared about the most. That's the most fun thing for me, that testing process, being in a house for a couple of weeks with people who are similar minded to you and having a good time. That was something I really enjoyed. And there's a lot of other people, Ben Stark has been one of my closer friends for 20 years, who would never go to a testing house if he didn't have to, and doesn't really enjoy that process, but enjoys the competitive part. And for me, without that, getting to hang out time, traveling to Magic events was not really worth it to me in a lot of ways. So, it was the team series thing coming up, and then the MPL coming up when I thought I was going to walk out again. And so, I don't actually know that I would have quit though. That's the thing, is
Yeah.
that it's so hard to, once the Pro Tour comes around and being in the Hall of Fame and being qualified, there's a good chance I would have just kept showing up. And it's very hard to be like, okay, I'm not going to go when I can. And so I would have probably taken it less seriously and not gone to as many things. And I think a large part of me wanted to have the option to not go to certain tournaments. Like, I've had a lot of negative experiences traveling to Europe with, a lot of things that have to do with just being on a plane for a long period of time. For me, being a big guy, it's very uncomfortable. The living situations just tend to be very different. The hotels in Europe have, different beds than what I'm accustomed to, different air conditioning situations, different internet situations that are just like out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways. And so it's not my first choice of things to do. And so spending a lot of money to travel there and be in a lot of pain once I get off the plane, and then not be able to kind of adjust that because, I have a bad back, I have bad lots of things. And so trying to figure all that stuff out was always it was tough. And so I wanted to have the option to not go to tournaments I didn't want to go to. And in the end, I probably still would have gone.
Okay.
Being told that you have to do this and that it is required made it feel worse. And so even though I probably still would have gone to, the Pro Tour in Barcelona, being told I have to go to the Pro Tour in Barcelona made it feel like a less fun experience. So that's kind of the mindset I was in at that point, where I'm like, I've been doing this for a long time. I still like a lot of parts of it. I don't like other parts of it. And I just want to have some agency in my own decisions, I guess.
I see. I remember that in a lot of interviews on the internet, also in like the series, they made like a bunch of videos from Pro Tours and stuff. You were often in it. You always said that Magic was like your hobby and your main job was poker. Which is kind of crazy, when you think about how well did you did at the Magic. Did you ever like really go like full all in, or are you just really that smart that you were able to like win anyway?
Did I really say that in interviews? Because for a long time they weren't.
I remember that they like asked you about like how do you perceive Magic or whatever, and you said, well, Magic is just my hobby, but like my job is poker.
I think that what I tried to say was that Magic is something that I choose to do because it's fun, and poker is something I do more as a job. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that I didn't take Magic more as a job, but it was something that was more for entertainment than like I need to do this to survive, to make money. And obviously there's more money in a lot of other things than Magic, and most people play Magic because they love Magic and not because they're like, I'm going to get rich playing Magic. Like, I think some people have been able to do that more recently with some of these bigger tournaments and MPL stuff, but that hadn't been the case for many, many years. And so Magic was definitely something I more chose to do because it was really fun. And poker, I didn't have as much fun doing, but it was something I was good at. And so I tried to put more time into to be successful at. And
I was basically curious that maybe if there was a lot of money in Magic, if you think that you would maybe win even more, like someone like Paulo or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Paulo is obviously a savant because Paulo doesn't really consume Magic. I don't think he plays Magic when he's not preparing for an event. For me, I think that I have consumed more Magic than maybe anyone. Like, I could be number one as far as Magic watched and Magic thought about it, because like while I do other things, while I play poker live even, I generally will have like a Magic stream or something up. I'm not paying a lot of attention to it, but it's something that is in the background. It's still today, even when I can't play Magic professionally, it is commonly on in the background. And I think a lot of what that did, and having Magic on Twitch, made me a lot better at Magic in other ways, especially in team tournaments, because it was on in the background, it wasn't something I was paying a lot of attention to. Being able to go from what I am paying attention to then switch to this and try to find the right play kind of instantly is something I got really good at, evaluating a board state and a hand and figuring out the correct line of play without being fully engaged in the game is something I think I'm extremely good at. Mm-hmm. And so being able to do that is, I think a big part of what made me successful, being able to play quickly and recognize a lot of different situations. It's just I've like, even though I don't play as much as most of the people who are at the top of the game, I consume as much Magic as anyone. So
Yeah, I actually remember when we tested together, you weren't actually playing that many games. You were always kind of like watching, and then I always thought, well, he's not really paying attention. He's not really, trying that hard. But then after like 2 days, you like kind of accumulate all the information, and you had a lot of things to say. So, I think it's kind of interesting. I don't really know that many people like that, but.
Yeah, I think that my brain, it's very hard for me to analyze decks, metagames, lines of play, even of not lines of play in game, but lines of like what card would have been better here, how do I make this matchup better when I'm playing the game, because I'm so focused on like how do I play my next turn. And so being able to watch top players in the world, like watching you and Andre play, or watching Paulo and Siggy play.
That's very flattering, very flattering.
I'm saying like that's the type of thing that watching players who know what they're doing play the game means you don't have to think about that part. You can think about the stuff that is going to then help the team. And so it doesn't matter whether you should be playing, the 4/4/4 this turn or holding up the removal spell. What matters is what spells and what interaction is going to matter the most in the matchup. How do I make the deck better? What's the best deck to choose for the tournament? And so that's the thing that I think I became very good at, and why I think I was one of the better team players in the end, even though I probably played the least games of anyone on the team for any testing session.
Mm-hmm. Was that always the case, or did you got to that point eventually? Because you were playing, professional Magic for a very long time. Were you always like that, or maybe at the beginning you were actually playing a lot yourself, but eventually you got to that point, or?
I think it was a progression. I played a lot more when I was younger. I think I had more capacity to do that. I think you just have more energy and more brain stamina to be able to think about more things at once when you're younger. That kind of fades a little bit as you get older. And I think that the way that I was thinking about the game, like me at 35, the things I thought about in Magic versus me when I was 18, like they're just worlds apart. But that was true for everyone. Like everyone just has so much more information. And so you look at what John Finkel was able to accomplish many, many years ago, and he was just so far above everyone else in Magic. But if you look at John Finkel then at his peak, when he was so much better than everyone else versus John now, I bet you John's better now, even though he's worse compared to everyone else now. And so it's just a progression of everyone's kind of gotten better. Everyone kind of understands more of these things and where their brain power should go in a lot better ways than was the case 20 years ago. There just wasn't as much information available.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
There's a lot of articles and theories and watching other people play and streams where it's just like that didn't exist. You'd play with your friends and there was no real other option. Like Magic Online didn't even exist 20 years ago, let alone Arena. And so certainly couldn't watch streams of it.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about stuff outside of Magic, because I think you're kind of known for poker. There are not that many people in Magic who are, maybe like David Williams, I guess. So I think people are interested to hear about it. You won those two World Series of Poker bracelets. Well, I don't even know what it is. So if you can maybe talk about it, that would be probably better.
Yeah, the World Series of Poker it has a main event. Dave Williams got second in it in 2004. That kind of brought him up to fame. And the main event is $10,000 to enter. There's always been $10,000. It's been around for many, many years, many decades at this point.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can anyone enter that tournament?
And anyone can enter that tournament. So you put up the $10,000, you can play. And that's it. It just became such a big tournament. When Dave got second, first place was $5 million. He got $3.5 million.
Wow.
And there was, a couple thousand players. I don't know the exact number, but I believe it was in the 2000s of players. This was a big boon after the Chris Moneymaker year, the year prior, which was on ESPN and got a lot of press. And so that was 2004. At that time, I was 20. You have to be 21 to play. So I couldn't play. And so I worked with Dave on poker stuff beforehand. And they had basically, they're similar to PTQs. They're called satellites, in that you can put up, like, with 10 players can all put up $1,000 and play a little tournament to see whoever's first would then win a seat to this $10,000 thing. And there was bigger ones where 100 players would put up $100 and various things like that, where that's how a lot of people got into poker tournaments a long time ago. They're called satellites, where you pay less money to try to win, to get a invite to a bigger tournament, basically. And that tournament has just continued to grow and grow. And so recently the numbers of people entering are around the 7,000 players mark, which it's a lot of money for 7,000 people to put up $10,000. And so First place has kind of varied between like $8 and $11 million.
Oh, so the money you can win isn't set in stone. It depends on how many people are playing, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's a sliding scale, very different than Magic, which that is part of why Magic can't do that. That is very much associated with the gambling world of each person buys in, they put up $10,000. A percent of that goes to the house, to the venues, to the dealers, to the floor staff. And so I don't know the exact percentage, but it's about 8%, I'd say, which is a ton of money when you're like $800 times 7,000 players. Or, it might even be more than that. I don't know the exact fees, but that's, every other dollar goes into the prize pool. There's a certain percentage that goes to first, second, and then they basically pay out between 10 and 15% of everyone who enters will get the minimum prize payout, which is usually, if you put it $10,000, it's usually around $15,000 is the minimum prize if you get to that stage. So that's the main event. Now it's a series, the World Series of Poker. So there's other preliminary events beforehand, and that has also changed in number as it's gotten bigger over the years. And so nowadays it's like 50 to 60 events each year, and they get a varied number of players. They have varied buy-ins. There's a tournament called the One Drop that gives money to charity that is like every other year where the buy-in is $1 million. So obviously that's hard. Not a lot of people playing in that one. And then they have ones that, kind of drop down to like $1,000. So sometimes they get a lot of players. They even have like these giant like promotional tournaments where it's like $500 to enter. You can enter. If you lose, you can enter again and keep re-entering for a certain amount of time, where it got like 70,000 or something entries, which just creates massive, massive prize pools. And of course, all the poker players kind of flock to Vegas during the summer for these events because there's like a month and a half or so of poker tournaments. And so when I was 21, I went out there and I became the youngest person to win one of these preliminary events. It was $1,500 to enter. It got like 1,100 people. So I won like $360,000 for winning. And then the next year I came back and I ended up winning another one, which was for a fairly similar amount. It was 300 or so. And that was obviously a long time ago now. I was 21 and 22, so 2005 and 2006. So it's been 15 years since that. But it's just kind of a lot of fun, and it's a big spectacle. And a lot of the stuff has been on TV. Like my first win was on ESPN. You can still find videos of it, and that's what it's about.
Because you're like very successful at both Magic and poker, I kind of wanna use you for encompassment. For example, when I talked to Javier Dominguez, he said that he tried to be successful at poker, but at a certain point he kind of realized that he has no chance to like ever reach the peak because the people are just like way too good. But he could perceive himself like getting there at Magic. Would you say that's accurate? Like, do you think that because of how much money is there in poker, the actual best people are like insane, but maybe we don't really see that in Magic? Or like, can you maybe talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, that's completely true. I don't even I would never try to become one of the top 100 poker players over the last few years, because right now there's so much data and there's so many what's called solvers, basically computer simulations you use to figure out the best way to approach different situations. There's something called GTO, Game Theory Optimal, which involves basically randomizing what your play is, so that in this situation you're going to do this thing 75% of the time, and so you're going to use a random number to generate whether you're going to do this, the 75% or that 25%, and it's just involves so much memorization and so much understanding of these situations that basically supercomputers can't really do a lot of this stuff. So it's very hard for humans to even approach it, and the amount of time you have to put into studying that kind of stuff to be at the peak is like, it's just ridiculous. And so all the respect in the world for the people who can do that and want to do that. I'm not one of them. It's just a lot. And so that's just to be one of the top like couple hundred players. And then it goes down from there. Like there's obviously a lot of savants and people who are not putting in as much time or just putting in some time or putting in no time, but just understand all this stuff. And so, yeah, being one of the top poker players is almost impossible. Now, the question is how much edge it actually brings you, because, there's a lot of variance in poker. And if you're very good, but you don't have to be in the top 200 players. Like if you're the 500th best player, you're going to beat the 100th best player a huge percentage of the time because there's a huge amount of variance. And so they're going to do things better than you're going to do. But in any given session, your odds of losing are not that high. Maybe they're 55%, maybe they're 52%, maybe they're 57%, whatever. It's not a huge differential. So it's kind of tough in that way. And the stuff that you have to study, I think, is very monotonous and not very fun. You're studying numbers and memorization. Whereas with Javier, he's now able to go into arena and just jam games after games, which he loves. Like that's fun work to him as opposed to study work, which is, it's just not on the same level. And so because he's already naturally talented at these various games, now he's able to do something he enjoys while getting better, as opposed to something that I think for most people is not fun to get better at poker. And so it makes a lot of sense why he would want to focus on being the best Magic player in the world versus being the 1,000th best poker player in the world, because it's just more fun.
I want to ask about another thing. Maybe you can clarify that. If you don't really know anything about poker and you watch all these movies and stuff, you think it's about bluffing and stuff. But you you mainly talk about memorization and optimizing your play and stuff. Is it mostly about that, or is the bluffing actually present? If you can maybe talk about it a little bit, because in Magic obviously you have a little bit of that, but for the most part there's always the best play, right? But I'm not actually sure if that's how poker works. At any certain spot, given all the information that you were able to accumulate, is there the best play, or can you maybe talk about it?
Yeah, in poker there's almost always the best play. In Magic there's almost always the best play, but there isn't a definitive this is what you should do. Like I said, with the poker thing and the solvers and GTO, is that the best thing you can be doing in poker is something that your opponent can't exploit. And so if you're going to make the same play every time with a hand, it's very easy to play against you, right? If you do this every single time when you have this hand, I can exploit you by doing something that, is good against that line of play. So if you're going to bet, a smaller amount every time you're on a flush draw, okay, well, if I can now know you're on a flush draw every time you're on a flush draw, I'm going to beat you badly. But if you're going to do it this percent of the time and do this the other percentage of the time, well, then it becomes impossible to play against you. And that's why it's game theory optimal, is that you're mixing up your play and making it so that no one, no matter what they do, can exploit you.
That seems kind of crazy.
So the tough thing about this is that, with Magic, if you attack a 2/2 into a 3/3 with no cards in hand, well, it's a bad bluff because you can't have anything. Yeah. You have no cards. Now, with a game of Magic, what's interesting is that you're still telling a story. If you had a lightning bolt in your hand, you would have for sure bolted this creature. So you would have to draw it this turn. If you did that, would you have played it this way, or would you have played it that way? And so trying to figure out why someone's making the plays that they're making is how you evaluate whether it's a bluff or whether it's not, or whether it's, if someone then makes a play where they're attacking their 2/2 into your 3/3, but it's a great turn for you, where if they cast the Giant Growth and kill your creature, but they can't play another spell, that works out very well for you. Well, again, this is a very easy call to make. You're going to block there every time if you know what you're doing. And so at that point, if I'm then bluffing the Giant Growth, attacking my 2/2 into 3/3 in a spot where you're always going to block, it is a terrible attack and a terrible bluff.
Yeah.
And it's very similar. Of course, it's different, but it's very similar in poker, where you're telling a story. You did something pre-flop. You did something on the flop. You did something on the turn. So now if you get to the river and a certain card comes off, and there's no way that the hand that you've played for the previous 3 actions would ever make sense with what you're representing now, well, that's a bad spot to bluff. But sometimes, you've played a hand in a way where this is very likely a card that you hit, where you're playing a hand like you have ace high and an ace comes on the river. Well, now maybe it's a great spot to bluff because it's a huge part of your range. And so at the end of the day, it is effectively a guessing game of poker, in that you are putting your opponent on a range of hands. And if this range of hands is going to beat you a certain percentage of the time, if there's $10 in the pot and they're betting $10 and they're going to beat you 80% of the time, well, you probably shouldn't be calling the $10. But if they're going to beat you 20% of the time, then you should 100% be calling it. So it's all just a percentage of figuring out how likely it is that they're bluffing, what odds you're getting on the bluff, and does the bluff has to make sense. So it's just a ton of information that a lot of it's going to come kind of secondhand for having a lot of experience, in the same way it would with Magic, in that, hey, your opponent is playing a deck that is never going to have a Giant Growth in it. They're not going to have a Giant Growth here. So this is, that kind of situation is something that comes up. And so there's a lot of parallels, despite them being very different kind of in the end.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the fact that you're good at one game makes you better at the other game as well, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, for sure. There's just So there's a lot of different benefits. Reading people, understanding why people do what they do, a lot of psychology that is very good in both games. I think the fact that, me being able to win the bracelet that I was able to win the first time, I was 21. I just turned 21. I was playing on ESPN. I had to do interviews. There was cameras everywhere. It was late into the night. Like, this is the type of situation that I think most people would be very stressed in, would be, very uncomfortable, would not be able to play their best. For me, I don't remember feeling phased at all. And I think a large part of that is that I've already played Pro Tour Top 8, and I've played on these other stages for nowhere near the amount of money, $10,000 versus this being like $300,000. It's a huge difference. But it was just a much more comfortable feeling because I've been able to have that experience in one. And so, I think there have been a lot of benefits in very different ways, both in playing the game and in just being able to find success in the games, that one has helped me with the other.
Last thing that I want to ask about is that, when I asked you what maybe there is something interesting that we can talk about, you mentioned the fact that you're a long-time professional sports bettor. I don't really know, I obviously know people who bet on sports, but they mostly do it kind of for fun. They don't have no idea what they're doing. I assume that's not the case for you. How do you get to a point where you just on average you're making money, you just need to watch a lot of sports and you know that someone is maybe injured, so on average they're gonna do worse, so how does that stuff work?
I mean, it's tough to say. I work with a pretty big group and organization, and
I see.
A lot of stuff is coordinated. The thing to beat sports betting is that you basically need to beat the final lines, and knowing where the movement's going to come in or being able to have ways to influence the movement is very important, because if you bet on a team to win by 3, at noon, and then at 5 p.m. they're favored to win by 5, well, there's kind of no losing at that point. You have the option to bet it on the other team at 5 if you wanted to, if you think that that's now, a plus EV play, or you can keep your previous plus EV bet, and you're kind of doing well no matter what. So if you're able to consistently beat the lines and work with sharp people who can move lines and all that stuff, it's going to be very beneficial, and it's very hard to lose long term if you're always getting ahead of the final lines. Now, if you just bet at the final line every time when you're just guessing, it's basically impossible to win because you have to pay juice. And so if you're paying $110 to win 100 on all of your bets, and you're flipping coins to do it, well, you're going to lose because you have to win 55% to, make any money. And so that's very hard. But I mean, it's just something that has been a lot of fun because I like sports a lot, and being able to work with people who are very smart and, know what they're doing and have been successful for many years helps a lot. And it's kind of weird because I literally have not been allowed to talk about it as a professional Magic player, which was why when you brought up earlier the poker thing, there was a long time where they told me I wasn't allowed to talk about poker while I played Magic.
Why was that? Why was that?
Because the idea of they don't want Magic to have anyone to think about gambling when it comes to Magic. And obviously there's a lot of similarities with Magic and gambling. Opening a booster pack in a lot of ways is a gamble. You're buying a lottery ticket that, if you spend $4 on a pack and you're hoping to open the $20 card, that's kind of gambling. And going to these big tournaments and entering them and hoping to get a return, it has a lot of parallels to gambling, while, of course being different than poker or sports betting. And so at some point, that of course they knew that I was into poker, and that they invited me to tournaments back again in 2010 because of poker, and Dave because of poker, and because we did promotion for Magic in poker media. That kind of changed there. But when I was part of NPL, they're like, you cannot mention sports betting under any circumstance, that this is something that you like, that you do, anything, nothing like that. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's just not where they want people to think about. But it was also very weird. Because that's also with John. John was the biggest sports bettor in the world.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he basically changed so much about sports betting. He was just so successful with the people that he was working with that Pinnacle, the biggest sports book, he just had so much influence on the game. And now he's out of that, but that was such a big part of his life, and it was just not something that really got talked about at all, because Magic just doesn't want to touch that. Which, why would you want to touch that if you have the option not to? There's kind of no gain there, and so if they can tell you not to talk about it, then it's good for them. But It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of makes sense. So.
No, yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's just weird as the person who's involved, where
Yeah.
you know they're like, "Oh, what do you do for fun?" or "What do you do for hobbies?" or "What do you do on the side?" And you're like, you know,
Nothing.
off. You know, I like to go outside. Like this is, you know, I spend so many hours a day doing this. Like it's my job, and it's been my job for so many years. And it's just like this weird thing where you're just like, "Oh yeah, you know, I like to hang out with my dogs."
All right, I think I've asked everything I wanted to ask about. Thanks for your time. It was fun. If you guys like the video, please click on the like and subscribe button. And yeah, see you at some future tournaments, hopefully.
Yeah, that would be nice. I would like to see any person again. That would be great.
All right, bye bye.